This is Groundeffected. My name is your dad, and you are currently looking at my Uniformation GK3 Pro and the prints that I'm about to tell you about what the hell this thing is. This is it. This is the model I'm making, and it is all over my desk currently, getting prepared to be painted. The model was printed between this machine and these two to be able to create it over one night, easily. Now I do have to say, this model was brought to you by Nice X Collectibles, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be available very soon. I also want to mention that it's because of me that I managed to get those eyes separated, and by eyes I mean glasses, separated from the head, so that thus forth we can paint the head and not have any issue. Also, can we just take a moment to appreciate the details of this print? This was printed in 0.05 millimeters. That is what we would call not the lowest layer height. This particular machine can print down to 20 microns, so this means realistically we got a long way to go before we're at its final levels of detail, and I must just say, this looks pretty fantastic. Now, this model does have a small little issue. It's not the biggest of issues in the world, but annoyingly, it's the kind of model that needs to fit inside of itself, which means there is going to be some filling to do. So I'm going to fill this little gap with some green stuff and make it look like it wasn't a gap at all, and then we'll move on from there. Also, I just wanted to mention my new favorite thing for removing any form of voxel or layer lines is actually these little rotary disc things that you attach. They're like a sanding sponge, but not really. I found it because of making metallic things, and genuinely, it does the best job. Although, I do want to mention that if you are doing this, you probably want to wear a mask. A proper mask, in my case, is one of these. It is FFP1NR. I don't know if it works the best, but I wear one of these so that I don't die. Now, I'm going to try not to die while I clean this model and prepare it to get its layers of primer, and when I get to that point, we'll come back and carry on the video. One of the most important things of painting a model is actually not painting the model, and it's actually preparing the model for paint. That is why I like to take an extensive amount of time to prepare my models. And now, sometimes I do miss things, but we won't talk about that in this particular video. Next step, I'm gonna paint these spectacles that go on her face, and I'm gonna use this clear red from Tamiya to paint that. And on the base, I'm going to use some green stuff to kind of cover up perhaps a printing imperfection, or I'm not really sure if it's just the fitting imperfection. Anyway, I needed to cover up this little gap that I had left over between her leg and the base. So as you can see on the base, there is some little bit of the green. So I painted my base white to start off with. I'm going to paint that green, and I'm going to let it dry overnight so that when I come back later and it's all nice and dry tomorrow, which is more than later, I can, it's not going to be a problem. And that's because I'm going to need to mask it. Well, I don't need to, but I think it's going to be so much easier if I just mask it. So yes, I'm going to let it dry, and that way it's going to not peel off when I try to take the mask off tomorrow. And for that green, I'm going to use this transparent green from Vallejo Model Color paints, and I'm going to spray that, not really thin down at all, just straight onto that white base color. Now, I waited an entire day before I masked this, so this is definitely the next day, and I masked this very carefully, going around the edges, making sure everything was pressed down, good and solid, before I then took my Citadel black primer and sprayed the black back over the base again. I totally unmasked this thing a little bit too soon than I should have, and you'll see why a little bit later. But before that, let's get back to them spectacles, shall we? And I'm going to paint the rims of these spectacles with a grey, and then I'm going to spray them with a gloss clear coat and put them aside. But while that's drying, I'm going to be painting some of this Wraithbone white over the top of this chair, and there was no particular reason why I needed to do that rather than a white zenithal with ink. Also, here we get to the part of the video where I told you I shouldn't have taken off that mask, but I did. And of course, if you're careful and only spray from a specific angle, you can make sure that you don't actually overspray over the nice green that you laid down the day before, trying not to mess up the day after. let's just move swiftly along from that part and get on to zenithaling the body of this lady. And this part, I did use a white ink over the top of this, and this is because I really wanted to push the whites. Okay, so I have now got most of the primer layers down, and I have a bunch of models that are hanging precariously, because I always say, if you're not taking a risk, are you even hobbying at all? Now, I am a very distracted person, and I have ADHD, I'm pretty sure of it, so at some point, I'm going to get very distracted by something else laying on my desk. Most importantly, right now, I'm being distracted by having to fix this light for my daughter, because apparently she broke it and I don't want to burn my house down, so let me just do that. And obviously I will not bore you with this kind of work, but I just wanted to let you know this is how much of a complete car crash every single paint job literally is. And I guess while we're distracted, now would be a good time for me to tell you about NiceX Collectibles, the sponsor of this week's video. This is a Patreon that produces awesome statues just like this and some of the other ones you've seen me produce on my channel, and the longer that you stay with them, the more models you receive. If you're with them up to 5 months, on the 5th month you will have access to all the STLs from any single month before joining. Now, I know the owners of this Patreon, not personally, but on the internet, and I have spoken to them at length about multiple things, and I can say that their Patreon is worth supporting just for the person behind it. At the end of the day, I like to support people and not necessarily products, unless the product's really good, but we're getting on a tangent. Anyway, make sure to join the NiceX Collectibles Patreon and let them know that I sent you, and let's get back to painting this friggin' model. Now, as you know, I had sprayed that Wraithbone over the top of this chair, and I'm now going to use Tesseract Glow, which is a technical paint, to make it extremely bright green. There is something about this green, and I don't know what it is. I'm pretty sure it has some form of a fluorescent color in it. I don't actually know, but it's so bright, it hurts your eyeballs. So in order to stop my eyeballs from hurting a little bit, I'm going to spray some of this other color. Hex, I don't know. It's some weird freaking technical color. I don't even think they make this one anymore, so slightly darker green would just probably do the same job. Now, moving on to the body while that chair dries, I'm going to spray Scarlet Blood, which is a game color from Vallejo, over the top of the zenithal that I laid down. Now, ideally, I would have wanted to do this with a red ink because it would be a little bit more clearer and help to push that contrast. I just made sure to avoid the shadows as much as I possibly could. I then came back with Caribou Crimson and sprayed that into the shadows. Now, for the biggest mistake of my entire video, and this is where I decided I wanted to ruin this chair. You can try this if you want to, however, you're going to need a lot more patience than I had when doing this, because it's going to take time. It takes time to clean up afterwards. That is the main thing, and I really didn't have time, as I have just arrived back from Germany and my entire studio is just running on absolute fumes at this point. So I ended up just brushing this over the top of everything, and the theory is you then come back and wipe it off later. However, a couple of mistakes I made here, and the mistakes that I made was by, first of all, making the wash too thin. Just way too thin. It should have been so much thicker, but I knew that if I made it thicker, it would have taken longer to dry, so I tried to save it by wiping it off sooner and trying to spray over the top of it. I really should have just gone back to the start, but I will not make myself sad about one little thing, and I'm going to just move swiftly on to them awesome little arms at the back of the chair. And I had painted those black, obviously, with a primer layer, and it was pretty simple to just add a dark silver layer over some of the details on these little arms, namely the tips and some weird little metal piece in the center, I guess. I also took that same dark silver and I painted the outside parts of the gems on the chair. At this point, I was pretty despaired about how my chair looked, but I knew that I had no choice but to carry on, otherwise there would be no video this week. And so, if you just overlook the fact that I painted my chair like a schmuck, we can carry on this relationship and it won't be a problem. Moving on very swiftly onto how I tried to save then the seat part of the chair. Oh my god, I completely ruined this whole chair. I'm just not going to talk about the chair, and I'm going to shut up now until the chair is gone out of my sight. Now let's bring some deck tan to the party, and of course there are some markings on Madam Web's body itself that look like the shape sort of a spider, if only a spider had something really wrong with it. Anyway, I painted deck tan over that symbol on her chest and on the little line that goes all the way down her dress. But also, I came back with a little bit of Carabao Crimson once that had dried, and I painted that into the little seams and crevasses around the side of the model. This is just to give them a little bit more depth and make them stand out just a little bit more against the flattish kind of red that I have. I'm now going to take some Griff-Charger Grey and carefully spray that into the shadows of the deck tan that I had painted down on the symbols. This is to create some depth, of course. Now I'm going to move on to painting the skin tones, and this particular model was a little bit different than usual, and of course there was already red laid down on the hands, so it was easy for me to throw some rosy flesh over the top of it, but on the face I had to spray red first and then spray the rosy flesh. I then went a little bit weird and took some Orcish Dermis and sprayed that into the shadows of everything. Then taking some basic skin tone, I went over the top of all of that. I watered this down about 50-50 with water, and I sprayed that into just the highlight areas of all of the skin tones. At this point, I was happy enough with the skin tones, and I unmasked the hands. Now this is another area that I treated this model like a schmuck, and I masked like a bit of an idiot. So anyway, I had to come back and paint back up to the line of masking with some skin tones first. I then painted her fingernails with some plain black. It's literally called black, and it is from Game Color. It's the worst black, by the way. Don't buy this black. Try to get the model color black. It is much better. I used dark silver on her ring, and then I used Tesseract Glow over the center of it to make it look like there is a gem in it. I then wrestled the model to get it into the chair. And I placed those robotic arms onto the back and moved on to painting the rest of this model, which is literally now just her head. And I'm going to take the deck tan again, and I'm going to paint all of her hair in deck tan. And while I have the deck tan out, I might as well paint the caterpillars on top of her eyeballs, which are called the eyebrows, because of course they would be a similar color to her hair, if not maybe a little bit darker. The next steps was to paint her earrings with that silver, the dark silver that I used from Monument Hobbies. It's literally called dark silver, and it's one of the best silvers, dark silvers actually, that I've ever used. I'm gonna take that scarlet blood and paint that over whatever that thing is on the back of her hair that's holding her hair together. Probably it's called a hair clip, but let's not worry about it. Taking some Griff-Charger Grey, I'm gonna spray that into the shadows of her hair and even over the back of that little clip as well. I'm then gonna come back with some deck tan and add a few little lines back into the hair so that it's not too bland. Now taking Magos Purple, I'm going to paint that quite thick into her mouth, letting that seep into all the creases and crevasses. And in the same fashion, I'm going to do that to her eyes as well. Once that has dried, I'm going to come back using some highlight skin from the Fairy Flesh Set series, and I'm going to paint her teeth individually, of course, which is one of the reasons that teeth is very difficult. I'm then going to use that same color, which is highlight skin, and paint the pupil. No, it's called the sclera. I know that because someone commented it in a friggin' comment one day. Anyway, I'm going to take some Reikland Flesh Shade and go around some of the edges around the outside of her face. This just helps frame some of that detail a little bit more, because sometimes they tend to look a little bit sort of monotone. So that Reikland Flesh Shade helps to bring it out. Now for her eyes, I'm going to paint them in a grey, and I'm not going to do too much to them. Just a simple grey for the iris and pupil at the same time, and I'm going to use Griff-Charger over the top of this to make them look kind of misty, like a blind person. And then I'm going to stick the glasses on, and once I've finally got them on, I'll call it done. Hopefully this video had some value to you, whether it was some information that you perhaps didn't know, and maybe you just learned how not to do something, which of course is all that I'm out to do with these videos. Now, I would also want to take this moment to say a very special thank you to everybody who watches and supports my channel, because of course without you guys, I wouldn't even be here in the first place. There are some people who are a little bit more special than those who just watch, and those are who call themselves my Patreons. They get extra content. They also get extra work in progress pictures. They get to know what's coming out before it even comes out. And if I am on time with things, they sometimes get videos uploaded to them before they even come to the YouTube. And now, of course, I'm not saying you should go to my Patreon and join it, but I am saying if you would like to support me, then please check out my Patreon. It's in the description, as well as the sponsor of this video, Nice X Collectibles. There is a link for both of them and all sorts of things in that description. Don't forget to look in the description. Also, don't forget to tell your gran that Groundeffected uploaded a new video, because she would be so happy to hear about that. And if you didn't like anything that you saw in this video, I really don't care. It's time for you to cough.